SC Media and our sponsor, Fortinet, are proud to present this month's CISO Stories program. Hosted by yours truly, Jess Hoffman, this is the show where CISOs share tales from the trenches and unpack leadership lessons learned along the way. Find this month's CISO Stories content at CISOstoriespodcast.com. The Cyber Risk Collaborative is a unique membership community enabling cybersecurity leaders to work together in a trusted environment. To learn more, please visit CISOstoriespodcast.com/CRC. All right. Greetings, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of CISO Stories Podcast. You back with me, Jess Hoffman, hanging out with Nadia. Hold on. Mazzarolo. I love that. It just rolls off the tongue. What's up, girl? How you doing, Nadia?
Oh, pretty good. Sitting over here in apparently rainy California today.
Yeah, you just moved to San Fran from Canada, huh?
Yes, yep.
Okay, I shouldn't have gave that away because your boot will come out.
Yeah,
No
exactly.
shade. It's cute. I love it. I've never been to Canada. I'm sure it's beautiful.
It's a little cold, but
a little cold. Well, welcome to Cali. I don't live in Cali either, but hey, welcome.
Yeah.
There's a great cyber community out there. I think you're going to have a great time. Yeah, for
Technology,
sure.
There's events to go to every day. Big AI community too, which has been fabulous.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for joining today. I know you and I haven't met on the streets, but a gentleman named Mike, I forget his last name. He's from San Francisco, right?
Yeah, yes, he's here.
The one. He's there. Tell him I said hello as well.
I will.
But yeah, he put us in touch and said how amazing you are. And, as far as women in cyber, you're trailblazing. And I was like, let's talk. So we're talking about cloud security today and your company. That's what you do as far as misconfigurations and identifying them. And we all know that misconfiguration is the number one and has been for quite some time. Well, I might have dropped down a little bit, but still, misconfigurations is how the adversaries are exploiting our networks, period, systems, period, hands down. And it's just such a broad topic, too. So excited to hear your thoughts on how misconfigurations in the cloud has led those clients or the service providers more vulnerable, in your opinion, or even your experience.
Yeah, well, I mean, it really all starts with this whole journey of we used to be setting up networks on computers, right? And in server rooms and whatnot. And so you had IT professionals working on the networks, and they kind of had a good sense about, setting up multiple servers. They had a good sense about security and best protocol practices. But then cloud adoption enabled the move to have developers now working on infrastructure. And I mean, I know you, Jess, you're teaching in university, and I don't know if you know anything about the computer science departments out there and what they're teaching. First of all, they're lacking in education in cybersecurity, in computer science programs today in university. And then it's almost non-existent. I would really like to know a computer science program that is actually teaching developers to set up databases, set up cloud, and do all of that work that they are doing today more than ever. And I think, that education's lacking. And so when you take all of that into account, you can kind of see why, misconfigurations become a really hot topic. So people are not being trained.
Okay, good. Okay, let's talk about that for a second.
Yeah.
Digital migration to the cloud is essential for businesses to remain competitive. But this shift introduces many new security and operational challenges, especially as the number of clouds and applications increase, rapidly expanding your attack surface for cyber threats to exploit. Organizations need a way to unify these increasingly diverse and vulnerable environments. Fortinet Cloud Security Solutions help you secure your application journeys into, within, and across any cloud. So are you insinuating, or is your point of view, or what evidence you've seen, that they're not getting taught to bake security in basically while they're coding and doing static and dynamic testing?
So while they're coding, yes, but setting up an infrastructure, it's a little bit different. So configuration files are not quite the same thing as code. but they've become as complex as code, and they have been, and this is where it gets murky with definitions, they've become codified. So all the infrastructure pieces, your application layer, your container layer, your cloud layer, have been codified and put into infrastructure as code. Right. And really, infrastructure as code was built by developers for developers because they're used to working with code, and they would prefer to be working on infrastructure by infrastructure as code, right? It's kind of how they are used to working on their code bases, for example. So they are used to understanding security and static analysis for code, but then there's the whole issue of what do you do for your infrastructure? And where's the training? Where's the training in universities for? Like setting up your databases, setting up your authentication services, setting up your networks, your servers, and all of that. That education piece is missing. So they're still taught
Girl,
code.
I hear you getting passionate. You banging on the desk. Calm down. Calm down.
Yeah, yeah.
Wait,
If
I
only
don't.
we were doing blooper reels,
I
right?
know.
It'd be
I
funny.
don't want to cut this out.
Don't
Like
hit the
we're gonna
desk.
don't hit the desk. Listen, I know you're getting excited, Nadia. I love the enthusiasm. Let's get excited about security. But yeah, leave the desk alone for now. let the desk go. That's great. But yes, clearly you're passionate about this, and you have your business built off of it. So I mean,
Yeah.
that's beautiful. So let's dig into that a little bit more. Like it's what we're not seeing when it comes to training, how we're not being able to skill up our workers, but ultimately, what's the problem though? Like, what is it that they need to be trained on exactly in the cloud?
Okay. So today, I think the biggest problem is that we're doing a lot of eggshell security. So we are doing a lot of making penetration testing very common, right? So everybody's focused on the eggshell and making sure you can't penetrate in. What happens though if 1 second they get in? Wouldn't you like to know that you're hardened all the way through? Like all the way, like how much damage can they do if they get in one split moment, right? So I think that there's got to be this whole training and concept on all the configurations and everything inside your infrastructure, everywhere, every layer, and how they connect and interact with each other need to be looked at. People need to be trained on how to look at it. And I really don't think the human brain is capable of mapping this out. Right. I do think that's why even in code, we've got static analyzers that can look at your code as you're coding and make sure you're not making errors because the human brain isn't seeing how all of that connects to each other. Right. Same thing with infrastructure. So yes, it's important to make sure you can't penetrate, but if you get inside, how much damage can you do? And this is something that's really, really interesting. Ransomware. So you read all the stats out there, okay, on, misconfigurations are roughly 30% of data breaches. Like that's roughly the risk, right? So then people are like, well, it's 30%. Do I really care? Do I not? But if you look into it, no, it's not IBM. Microsoft came out recently with a study that shows 80% of ransomware attacks today are caused by misconfiguration. So
That sounds more
how,
like it.
how
Yeah.
important is it really?
It's very important. And it's just
Yeah.
so broad, too. I mean, I guess give us some examples of misconfigurations that you see and that you're like talking about right now, like that you think we should share with us what you've been seeing out in the
So
wild.
So actually, I find a lot of misconfigurations are actually in default configurations. So I can give two examples of default configurations. Those are literally the worst because there's so many. Everything's been configured one way when you start with it, and people don't even know what they're looking for per se. So you have AWS. They have no backup by default. That is a configuration change. So if you don't know, you need to look for that and set it up. You would assume that the default would be backups enabled, but it's the other way around, right? So that's a big one. So people have lost a lot of data because they assumed that the backups were there and they're not there. So that's a huge one. And then GCP, it allows for RDP, remote desktop protocol, by
Ooh,
default. That's a huge one. Like, so somebody could
yes.
just access your desktop, and many administrators don't know that. You would assume that that is something you have to configure, right? You would assume it's the other way around. So those are just two cases where the default is not what you would assume.
Mm-hmm. I hear you getting excited again, girl.
Yes. Yeah. No hitting the desk.
No, leave it. What did dust do to you this morning? It's still early out there.
Yeah.
Um, no, that's a
Yeah.
great point, and that's why I used to be an auditor, and like CM6 was like the control, or is it CM7? I always get confused, but just
Mhm.
misconfiguration. So it can be like default, like you just said, or even default passwords, as simple as that
Yes.
is, right? We know people still do that, or it can be weak encryption, or it could be shoddy GPOs, or there's just it's so broad when talking about misconfigurations.
Mhm.
Have you seen any specific that are unique to a cloud environment?
Okay. So this brings me to this topic of shared responsibility. Very hot topic, right? So just to lean into this a little bit, did you know that a study came out, PwC, that said 30% of Canadian, yes, I'm Canadian, so Canadian CISOs think that because they're using a major cloud provider, that they're covered for security. 30% of CISOs
Why
assume
Canada though? Why just focusing
that's
on?
that is the study that results that we found, PwC.
Hmm.
Lost my earbud. We're gonna have to cut that out. Earbud
No,
falling.
no. It's
Okay. Yeah.
exciting. It's
So
exciting. Okay.
yeah. So basically 30%. So we can assume that that probably carries forward to the US, and it'd be really interesting to find a study on that as well. But just the whole idea that people don't realize there's a shared responsibility model, which means security is also in the hands of the teams working in AWS or GCP. And here's a classic example. We originally thought we could have found a bug, but it is not a bug. It's just a massive, wide misconfiguration that's out there in many login portals today. If you go and inspect in the terminal, you can see and find very quickly that, especially so using AWS, if they're using CloudFront, you'll see an error from CloudFront in the response headers. Okay. So basically, they didn't configure their OWASP secure headers. So they didn't. So basically, they're open to cross-site script attacks. And you could basically replicate the login portal, a little social engineering hack, and you get all the passwords. Okay. And there's thousands of login portals out there, which you can go and inspect yourself today and see if they're using AWS. They probably assumed that that was covered, but there's documentation for the developers, and that's the responsibility of the organization, of the user.
So
That's
basically, what
one.
I'm hearing you say is they need to read their contract. They need
Well,
to
yeah,
understand, yeah, what they're procuring and who's responsible for what.
yes.
Yeah, yeah.
And really knowing that there's a lot of security that rests on the company. They just because they're using AWS or GCP or Azure does not mean that they're secure.
So isn't GCP like the most securest?
It's a shared responsibility model. We should dive in and figure out some data on how many organizations were using GCP or Azure or AWS and see how many of those were breached, right? It's not
Okay.
even just the cloud provider itself. It's now everything that is now running in the cloud, right? And how it
Like,
connects to the cloud, like your
right.
containers, like your databases, authentication services. It's a massive, it's like a big web of tools that are all connected by configurations to make them work.
So I heard you say default, whatever is a problem, not
Yes.
understanding shared responsibilities.
Mhm.
And you gave some examples there, which cross-site scripting one, very scary. I used to see that all the time, regardless of how mature an SDLC or XLC,
Mhm.
whatever, you know what I mean? That's like cross-site scripting. I don't know why it's so difficult. I'm not a programmer, no, so please no shade on programmers. That's why you have a security people to help you out there. So
Yep.
those are two big misconfigurations that you just mentioned. Give us another couple related to cloud environment.
Those are the two that I have right on hand. So cut that section. Cut that section out. If you
No,
had my
no.
co-founder, technologist right now on, he would give you like a massive report.
No, we ain't cutting
I
anything,
did
nothing
two
out.
basic ones.
We're not cutting anything out. You talked about the training though too, and I can't say that I'm not really sure if there's like cloud specific classes at universities. I want to say there's got to be. I know that like a lot of universities,
Yeah.
especially big ones, have adopted like and cloud's been around a while now. I
Hmm.
mean, how about this? Another question. I'm gonna give you another question. What about
Okay.
AI? How you just mentioned
Oh.
that it's about what's in the cloud as well, and clearly we've changed we've innovated over the past. I mean, what ChatGPT dropped to the pub like 2 years ago, and now it's in everything possible,
Uh-huh.
including the cloud, right? Or, all of our searches, etc. So, in your experience with customers lately, have you seen any additional like vulnerabilities when it comes to like misconfiguration of any AI type of tooling or code that's running?
So with our current customers, no, we have not run into that. I think people are still, a lot of larger organizations are still a little wary of how much impact they let AI have on their direct product. I know, for example, we can't get a contract with anyone that has a military contract that has AI if AI was running in our tool. So there's still a lot of regulations on how you adopt AI and where it's allowed to be used. I think it's changing right now. Like we're in the process of it being more adopted and accepted, but I do know that when we signed one contract last year, we had to make sure there's no AI in our product itself running. So I think that's applying to other organizations as well. I think AI is producing a lot of different risks out there as well in terms of validity of information, and a lot of security risks when it comes to identity. So I do think we need a lot of identity tooling and a lot of it is coming out now to really kind of validate that what you're seeing and what you're hearing and reading is legit. But yeah.
Yeah, AI is AI. So, how about sticking with the misconfigurations, because this is a great topic. Have you seen any improvements with misconfigurations that maybe a few years ago, 5 years ago? I mean, cloud's been out for like almost 10 years. I don't know, 10 years now. What have we done better when it comes to ensuring that certain misconfigurations are no longer an issue?
So there's been a lot of tooling in the configuration space that's come out in the last 4 years specifically. And so I do think when it comes to scanning and looking for misconfiguration and checking for compliance issues in the configurations for SOC 2, ISO 2701, um, that tooling for the cloud provisioning layer and the containerization layer have been built and have been getting more widely adopted. We can look at Wiz, for example. Sneak has some vulnerability scanning as well, and quite Tenable, Palo Alto. So a lot of these organizations are adopting tooling right now, and their clients are using it on their cloud provisioning layer and the provisioning layer. The issue is that we believe, and this is where we fit in, we need to scan all the layers and how they connect.
All the layers, like defense and depth.
Exactly. So you have your cloud, your IAC, your containers, and your applications. All of those have configuration files. And many of those configuration files, what happens is if you make one change and you release it, post deployment, you can have a downtime because that configuration file conflicted with something else that you had running and another configuration file. So you really need to be able to scan all of it and how they connect to prevent those downtimes later. It's a very big issue for downtime.
Hmm.
It used to be that way with code all the time. Code would
Mm-hmm.
crash because you had an error, but then you had static analysis tools for code that really reduced that significantly.
Okay. So you
Hmm.
think we've advanced in the tools that are available that allow us to identify and those misconfigurations and even
Yeah,
maybe
and some of the
remediate
default
them.
configurations, remediation, cloud layer, provisioning layer, like those, we have a lot of tooling for, which is great because it is getting adopted and people are seeing the need. And now we just need to go even deeper.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's solid. Yeah, I completely agree. Like the industry has just changed so much and it's hard to keep up.
Yeah.
It's hard to keep up, for sure. So tell us how everybody can find you, Nadia.
Oh, yeah. So Coguard.io is a great way to kind of look into what we're doing, which is, again, that defense in depth, scanning every configuration file everywhere, as I like to say. And you can also, from there, read some of our research. We've had a project funded by OpenAI, and that research is on GitHub. We also have the ability for you to go on portal.coguard.io and actually run an initial scan or two, or look at a test environment to just kind of play around and see what kind of misconfigurations we're looking for. Yeah. And you can also contact me at nadia@coguard.io.
Yes, our favorite Italian from Canada, excuse me, that's now in San Francisco. So maybe I'll
Yes.
see you next year
Part-time.
at
I'm
a
part-time in San
RSA.
Francisco right now for
Okay.
now. Yeah,
Okay.
but yeah.
Well, I know I'll definitely run into you next year at something on the West Coast. So that'll be fun.
Yeah, that sounds
Um,
great.
yeah, so totally appreciate your time. But before I let you go, I always like to ask my guests this question. Nadia, tell me, what would you tell your 18-year-old self right now?
Honestly, study computer science.
Okay.
Honestly, there's many times where I'm like, why did I not? I did it in high school. I was really good. It would have just made a lot of sense to kind of continue learning that skill. I think everybody should learn that skill. I think girls need to code. That whole
Okay.
girls can code movement.
Yeah.
Everyone should be coding. Back then, all guys in my classes in high school, but me.
Ugh, I
So,
hated coding. That was the worst.
yeah,
What's your major in now?
music. So
I knew
I
you
did
were
a
gonna say
master's
some.
in music.
I was gonna say
Yes.
art,
Yeah.
but that's
Yeah.
okay. Classical
Music
music
is
is
math.
fantastic. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, oh yes, you're an opera singer. That's right. You said that's beautiful.
Yes.
I love that.
Yes.
It's where the energy comes from. You should do an
Hmm.
opera on cyber, like a cyber
I should.
opera or something. That would be.
That'd be really interesting.
Nobody's done that. I have not seen that. We got the nerdcore, performing, but no, I don't know, nerd op era.
We
I don't know.
should
We're gonna
nerd
coin that.
ops.
Nerd op. Yeah, we'll figure it out.
We've got
We're
something.
well, Nadia, it's been really awesome talking to you. I love your energy,
Likewise.
and it sounds like you're doing a lot of really cool stuff. Welcome back to the States, and we'll
Yes,
talk
I'll
really
be
soon.
around. Sounds
Yeah.
good.
All right. Thank you.
Take care.
Take care. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for tuning in for this week's episode of the CISO Stories podcast. We want to say a special thank you to our sponsor, Fortinet. Please subscribe to the CISO Stories podcast, and you will receive a new story each Tuesday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. We'll see you next week for a new episode.